Test. Testing. Hello. Test. Oh, you know what it is? I know what's going on. Testing. Can you hear me? Yes. Okay. All right. Test. Oh, got someone in the audience. What's up, dude? Let me do that. Give you invitation to speak. I think that worked, right? Yes, cool. Can you hear me okay? All right, cool. Yeah, last time this wasn't working, so I'm glad it's working now. How you doing? That sucks. Damn. I'm glad you're feeling better. I'm glad you got the phlegm out. We got one more who joined. I'm good, man. I'm good. Excited to be doing this. Got some cool things in the back burner, so pretty stoked. It's Drift Out. I also invited you to join. I think it's gonna be small, so I think we can just kind of keep it an open chit chat. So I'll just keep the speaking on all the time. So yeah, it's Drift Out. I invite you to speak if you want to jump on. How you doing, man? Good. Well, cool. It's 5:32. If more people jump in, great. But yeah, I saw that there's a decent amount of interest as far as like the mixing and mastering process. So I figured, I would share what I know if you guys have any questions, or if you guys have any cool tricks or tips. I'd love to hear what you have as well. But I've done a little bit of work in a recording studio before. And probably for the past 5 years now, I've really dived into the art of mixing and mastering. A little funny side story is what got me into it is I'd been composing for a little while, and I finally found a composer to review my work, and he was like, "Dude, you're a great composer." And I was like, "Yeah," like a guy. He's like, "But your production is dog shit." I was like, "Oh," like verbatim. He's like, "You got to fix that." And so he gave me a book to read, which I'll share with you guys later on. Just remind me if I don't mention it for a while. I read this guy's textbooks cover to cover. Got an internship at a production studio. Did a whole bunch of really awesome classes in education. Got some hands-on experience. And so, Am I like Kanye level producer? No. But I've now have got myself in front of professional AAA composers a handful of times, and my production has gotten compliments before. So take that for what it's worth. So yeah, happy to kind of share what I know, and or I can just dive into it because it might be one of those things. I'm not sure how familiar you guys are with production. I can kind of give you a baseline, and then we can work from there. So up to y'all. Burning questions, or I can start and we can see what comes off of that conversation. Cool. Cool. All right. So let me get my whiteboard because I'm a whiteboarder, as you guys. The more of these we'll do that I'm hosting, the more y'all will realize how much abuse this whiteboard gets. Ugh. And there we go. Okay. So the way that I like to think about production, there's really two buckets for production. And I want to focus just on the one. If we have time, we can go into the other. But in production, right? So this is mixing and mastering. You're doing one of two things. You're either this happened last time, didn't it? Sorry, I have one of those standing desks and I turn my chair and then it like hits the button. So you have one of two things that you're doing when it comes to mixing or to producing. You're either fixing your song, so making it sound better, or you're doing something creative. So like, for instance, fixing a song is pretty self-explanatory, right? Like you've made this song, you want it to sound better. So you're doing things like EQing and compressing and all those things to try to, bring out each of the tones and make it sound balanced. The creative side is like EDM is a perfect example. Like EDM is really just to me is the creative side of production. They're doing all these like really cool, crazy effects. And most of that is made with some sort of a production tool. Like they may start with oscillators, which are like waves and things like that. And then they're going to like maybe hyper compress them or do some crazy EQ and move filters back and forth to create this really awesome soundscape. Both are which are useful. But for the context of this conversation, I'm probably going to stick with fixing because I assume that's probably what everybody was like, oh, I'd love to learn how to mix and master to help what I have really sound better. So when it comes to fixing mixes, actually, before I get in there, do we know the difference real quick? Because I know this can kind of get confusing. Are you all familiar with the difference between what it means to mix a song versus what it means to master? Okay, cool. Yay, nay? Okay. No, that's all right, dude. This place is where all questions are able to be answered. So, so basically, what mixing is let's say I have an individual song, okay, and I have instruments and different parts that make up this song. The job of the mix is to make sure all those parts come together to make it feel cohesive and balanced. Like I'm doing individual things with each of these parts to make sure they all fit together. So maybe I'm like adjusting their volume, or maybe like the bass and the kick are overlapping. So I do some EQ things to separate them so you can hear them each. And then in doing so, I take everything that these players have played and I just make it sound better, right? This is mixing. Is really altering individual parts of a song to make it sound like a whole. Mastering is, think of that like a step higher. So there's really two things I see with mastering. One, mastering is like, if you're like working on an album, for instance, is making sure all those tracks sound cohesive. So, like a mix, right? We're dealing with tracks in a vertical space. Like the drums are playing at the same time as the guitar is playing at the same time as the bass, and those all need to fit together. But then this song that I just made needs to sound cohesive with the next song and the next song and the next song, because if one sounds like really crazy, super bass heavy and the other one's like really tinny and like, that might be a cool effect, but they don't really sound like they belong in the same album. So that's one example of mastering. The other example of mastering, which I think applies more to modern day, is making sure that that song that you wrote sounds as good as it can on a multitude of different devices. So like if you've ever mixed a song and it sounds really awesome in your headphones and you take your headphones off and you play it in the car, you play it on your laptop or you play it on your phone and you're like, dude, this sounds terrible. It's because it wasn't mastered properly. So that's the other role of mastering. And then I would say finally is you can master a song, like an individual song, in a way that like I think of it as like a meta mixing, to where like you can do like overarching effects on a singular song that maybe bring out some parts. And I could pull some examples, but like you can separate those parts and make the bass come out more, make the mids come out more, make the highs come out more with some subtle mastering on the song itself. So after you're done mixing it, you can lay some like effects on the master track being like the final thing that you hear, to give that song like a little extra panache. So in short, mixing is you're just messing with individual parts of a song. Mastering is you're messing with the song as a whole and across different songs that maybe belong on the same platform and across various platforms. So that's the long and short of it. Got anything to add to that, Zach, or does that kind of cover what you had? Mm-hmm. Yep. Cool. Awesome. Thank you. So, so let's go into mixing. So when it comes to the fixing of the mix, there's really three things that I think about when I'm trying to address issues within a mix. The first is you're dealing with the volume problem. The second is a frequency problem. And the third is a space problem. I could pretty much argue, and then like you have creative on the other side, but outside of creative, I could argue anything that you're doing in a mix is to solve one of those three problems. Is either something's volume is happening in a weird way, the frequency is something wrong going with the frequency, or something wrong is going with like where the instruments are positioned or the parts are positioned within the stereo image. And a lot of times these things can happen all at the same time. So we'll start with like, volume, for instance. And a lot of times when people think volume, they're thinking like, oh, you're just moving the fader up and down, the fader being like the actual, I'm just assuming, no prior mixing experience, but have you ever seen like in a production studio where they have that really big table and they're like pushing those little switches? It literally looks like a really big version of of that, that's volume adjustment. I just unplugged a whole bunch of crap by accident. Sorry, computer. Anyway, a lot of times people are just like, oh, so you're just moving faders. Well, like compression does that as well. And compression does this in a variety of ways. So let's start with, let me see where I want to go with this next. I could go into like the individual tools as like compression, EQ, things like that on a very high level, or I could go into like a little bit more of a deep dive with each of them. And I could take a lot of time doing that. So let me start with compression. I'll go high level, I'll go deep, and maybe we only get through frequency in this part. And if I get through compression, we can pick something else, unless there's like something else that's like, hey, I'd really like to learn how to EQ better, or I'd like to know, how to utilize reverb better or delays or things like that. What would you guys prefer? More like a high level, I kind of touch on everything, or more like, hey, this is the one thing that's really confusing me, and it'd be really cool if we kind of go high and then like deep dive into that one type of tool. High level across everything. Okay, cool. Let's do that then. So yeah, let's start with volume first. Let me move this over here. So generally when I think of volume, and my desk isn't moving around, when I think of volume, right, we have our fader. And our faders are essentially, right, controlling the amplitude of what we're hearing, like how loud something is. But then there's really two types of how loud something is, right? You have gain and then you have volume, right? So let's say I'm going to share my screen. And I'm just going to open up a hypothetical like guitar pedal board to really try to drive this point home. So let me share my screen. I don't know, just like maybe my entire big selection, this window. Okay. Are you guys able to see this Reaper window? Okay, cool. So I'm going to open up this thing called Bias FX, which is really cool. I don't have a guitar plugged in right now, but if we need me to, I can do this. So now if anybody has ever played guitar or like hooked up a microphone or I don't know, do Infernal Cowboys. Hooked up a microphone. You may have heard like that 60 hertz hum. Are you guys familiar with that? That like, that's just really a producer's worst freaking nightmare. So let's say I have my guitar, it's plugged, and we're gonna get rid of the gate. I'll go over what that is in a bit. But let's say I have my guitar, it's plugged into the drive, which then goes into the head, which then goes to the cabinet, and then that after the cabinet, this is what we hear. So if I go into this drive, we're going to pretend that this like drive pedal here, this really is like kind of gain in a way, but like, we'll just say like this knob that I'm turning is gain. And we're going to pretend that this level here is volume, which, what's that? Okay. Let me fix that. Thank you. Change stream. I don't know. How do I want to do this? Let me stop. Yeah, I think you're right. Can I just iPhone Desk View HT applications? Yeah, let me make selection. Share all application windows. Here we go. That works, right? Okay. Cool. And I think Drifta, did he pop out? Oh, try again. There we go. All right, I got you back, bud. So let's just pretend this drive paddle, which this more or less is, but for simplification, like let's just say this drive is our gain and this level is our volume. So if I were to turn up gain, like gain is essentially the volume of the input. So if I have, let's say, something before this gate pedal and I'm turning up the gain along with like the drive and everything, essentially what I'm doing is not only am I turning up the guitar tone, I'm also turning up like that 60 hertz weight. Like everything that's coming in, I'm amplifying that before it goes out, right? Now let's say in between this, and I maybe put like this gate pedal here, and I use this to cut out that 60 hertz hum, and then I maybe turn up some sort of control on this, right? Actually, I know this is being really confusing right now. Let me start over. because I'm trying to figure out a way to articulate getting rid of that hum. And I might just have to draw it out. Anyway. So let's say try to give you guys a good example because gain is volume input, volume is volume output, right? If I have a man, how would I want to articulate this? I guess I was on a decent track. Sorry for the brain fart. Yeah, so if I have volume or my guitar coming into, we'll say, this drive pedal and it's got 60 hertz hum. If I turn up gain, right, that's going to turn up everything, the guitar tone and the 60 hertz hum. If I then cut it out through this pedal somehow and then push that volume out or push that signal out and then turn up the volume, it's only going to turn up what has happened post this pedal, more or less, right? So hopefully that's clear. Yeah, so gain is everything coming in. Output is just what happens after, or volume is what happens after all the effects. And so how does that apply to mixing, right? Well, let's say you have this guitar part that you're playing and you're listening back to it and, you know, maybe you've compressed it, and we'll get into compression next, but in doing so, you've brought out this hum that's been there persistently. Well, what happened is you added gain to the compressor, which is now compressing that signal that you want to release versus leaving the gain low, doing your compression, and then turning up the volume of the signal post-compression. Yeah. So, man, do I want to plug in my guitar? I won't do that. Anyway, sorry. I know that was like really confusing to try to articulate just with words. I can draw it out if you guys want, but did that make sense, or was that more confusing than helpful? Okay. Cool. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So you could use, I guess, like when you're doing it with EQ, right? You're probably trying to turn up what you've done after the EQ. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that your high pass filter. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So that's a great example, right? So if you well, let me actually just drag some pedals on here. So like let's say we have this filter and we're just gonna I'm just gonna do it with plugins because we can kind of see it. Well, actually better yet, let me just do this. I don't know, an EQ. So like at the top of this chain, we'll say vital is whatever part, this could be our synth or whatever, and then you're going through and you're saying, all right, I want to do something like that, right? And I don't know why it's set, but really it's, you want to cut out all this stuff here in the blue and leave what's over here, more or less, right? And yeah, so then what I could do is I could turn this up or down, right? At this point, by moving this fader here, I'm turning up the volume of this plugin because it's now post-process, right? And so whatever happens here, I'm going to delete this bias because I think this was not a great example. But let me go to like a compressor, for instance, and any compressor. And I can actually play a synth. This might be good to actually show. But let's say whatever I play here, I EQ it, and then here's my compressor. Now, this doesn't have a gain knob on it, but really by me turning up the volume on this, I'm essentially like kind of turning up the gain on this, right? Because now this input, the recomp input, is the volume of whatever the output of this is. And so whatever happens to this ozone, right, is now the only thing that's being compressed here. So what could be interesting is, let's say, I don't know. Okay, probably like just a regular. Let me actually do something that has a little more stank to it. Do super pluck. I'm not sure if you guys are able to hear whenever I play that synth. You can, cool. Is that a good volume for y'all, or do I need to turn it down? Good volume, okay. So if I play this, I'm gonna adjust the envelope a little bit, and we can get into envelopes too if you guys are interested. Yeah, cool. And let me undo this. So I'm playing the same notes here. I'm playing like an A minor, essentially. If I turn this up, which I won't, so I'm actually going to turn the volume of this down. And you can kind of hear that like echo, that right? So by doing so, and by turning this down, I can almost like, if I wanted to control this entire instrument, I'm like slowly getting rid of that delay, which is going to be now less and less affected by this plugin here until maybe it becomes no more. And then if I turn this up, right, it's going to have less of that ping pong delay. That's then going to go into the compressor. So this is kind of how like gain and volume can work, right? So by adjusting where each of these, again, we're only dealing with volume now, but again, there's the concept of like, because I'm adjusting the volume of this, it's essentially the same thing as the gain in this next plugin, because now it's the input here. Right. So by adjusting those pieces, I'm now allowing more or less of this plugin to affect the previous sound, which then continues down the chain. Yeah. So there you go. Gain versus volume. Probably, I'll come up with a better way to explain that, and I'll post a video on it. But yeah, so we'll go into. We talked about gain. We talked about volume. We can do compressors. We can do envelopes, EQs, anything in particular, Zach, that you're like, oh, it'd be really cool to know how to do this piece better. And I will do my best to explain it better. Okay, cool. Yeah, so cool. We'll do, let me reset the synth. The cool thing about envelopes is they're not, once you get them, they're not too bad. So if you can see like this little dial that I'm moving around, this little point, right? In this synth, this is the envelope. And so like really every instrument has some sort of envelope. You may have heard the term ADSR before. Okay. So basically all ADSR is those are the 4 stages of an envelope. So attack, if I do something, and I'm just going to focus on attack right now. If I do something with a quick attack, it's like, bam, like attack is going from no sound to 100, the time it takes for that to happen. So what are some instruments that have a very quick attack? Well, like a drum set is pretty much all attack. Like as soon as you hit it, it's up. A piano, right? You push a key, it gets to 100 right away. A guitar also has a very quick attack. Now, what are some instruments that can have slow attacks? So if I slow this attack down and draw it out, you hear it was like, wham, and I can even make that more extreme. Right? So we have things like maybe a violin player is starting piano and then like growing into it, or maybe a horn player is doing a swell. Those are ideas of slow attacks. Cool. So next, what we have is decay. And I'm actually going to pull sustain up just so you can see. So decay is the time it takes for a sound to get from its most loud position to where it holds in stasis. So, for instance, if I was a trumpet player and I do a solo like, "Bwah," and then kind of bring it back down and hold it, I gotta go, "Bwah," and it has a very quick decay, or I can go, "Bwah," and like slowly bring it down. So here's something that has a slower decay. So it goes, "Bah," versus something, some instruments don't have a decay, right? It's like the decay, well, the sustain was the next thing we're going to talk about, but like there's no, it goes down. It's the 100% is where it holds its highest note. So that's decay. So then sustain is where attack is like how long it takes to get to the loudest note, and delay is how long that instrument takes to taper off to where it's going to hold its main volume. Sustain is the level of that volume, right? So here, if my sustain is the same level as the attack, I don't really have a delay at that point, right? But if it's lower, you can hear it went up and then it kind of hovered down, and that time in between those 2 points, between the top of your attack and your sustain, that's the decay. All right. And finally, release is how long it takes for that note to go from either its sustain level to nothing. So if I really draw out this release, I'm at sustain now. I'm letting go. Or if I don't have any release, now it's gone. And so if you think about that, like, oh, like you could make a really cool lead sound like that, or I can make something that sounds more like because I made everything so fast. Or I could have something swell, or I could, have it have more of a transient. And so these are envelopes. Now, I'll pause there. Attack, sustain, or attack, decay, sustain, release. Do we feel good about that so far before I go into like the next stage of this? Cool. So really all envelopes are is they're the product of shaping sound. And we can begin to mimic or model certain instruments or certain vibes depending on how we model these envelopes. But what's really cool about them is we just touched on how envelopes function on volume. But what's really neat is they also function on effects as well. And so let's take, I have a great example for this. So let's take I'm just going to find a random drum kit. Actually, we're going to do like a snare. Let's do that one. Okay. So here we go. We have a snare hit. And you'll notice, like, let's say we're playing this and it just that transient, that initial like pop is like way too harsh for us. And so, but what we want to do is we want to compress it down. So we reel it in, but we don't want to affect the color of it like that, like all this. We don't want to affect that. We just want to get literally this piece right here where it like hits us a little too hard. Well, what we can do is say, okay, here's my compressor, right? And if you notice, oh, well, we have attack and we have release, right? And these are essentially, well, they are the exact same thing as attack and release in the ADSR model. Now, we don't really need things like, I mean, we kind of have things like sustain, but not really. But really for this compressor, all they're worried about is attack and release. Really, how quickly is this compressor going to kick in versus how quickly is it going to let go? And so if you think about this, well, if this compressor, and we can, look at the screen over here, you can see it's being, I'm going to turn this down too because it's a little loud, but you can see like this is triggering this compressor. We're getting a signal. And if I move this attack way out over here, just move everything over, even if I compress this, like we're hearing it. Let me like really make it big. Oh, this is only in milliseconds. Never mind. But like, yeah, it's working. But if I like make the attack 0, you can hear the difference between over here. You can still get a little bit of that initial transient, which makes it loud, versus I make the attack 0, and it's just crushing the whole sound. You get rid of that transient, essentially. So if I draw this out to visualize it and say, so let's say here's our drum sound, and this is volume 0. Disregard this stuff at the volume at the bottom. And we'll say this green line is my threshold. So anything that goes above this green line, I want to make that quieter. Well, if I put a fast attack on it, that's 0, that's 0. As soon as it triggers, this compressor's going on. Pretty much as I'm saying is like, boom, done, right? If I put a slow attack on it, however, and let it ramp up, it's going to look something like this, to where this is still going to come through at full force, but everything after is going to get compressed. And so like envelopes can work that way too. And they can work with, yeah, like literally any effect, anything you can think of, you can throw an envelope on. Cool. Sweet. So that's envelopes. I think I got time for maybe like one more thing we can go over. We can do EQ, we can do compressors, we can do more of maybe that like volume versus frequency versus space. Anything that sticks out, or I'm not sure if he's still here. Oh, I heard him briefly. Do we have a chat? Oh, wait, there's a chat. Hold on, I see it. Oh, wait, Drifter is here. Drifter, you can also use the chat feature if your video or your mic's not working. I'm not sure if you heard me, so I'll drop it here. Okay, cool. He got you. All right. Sure. Okay. Interested in how you approach removing versus boosting certain frequencies. Okay, yeah, we can do that. Let me actually pull up a session. I can do this in real time. And it might actually be good for me to just do something in real time instead. So let me pull this. This is actually the thing that you guys had critiqued the other day. So this is perfect. And I'm going to save a version of this. So I don't totally jack it up. All right. So there's a couple reasons, like a couple things that I'd want to do with, why is this like close window? That's so weird. That interesting. Is this going to do this like the entire time? Okay, I guess so. All right. So there's a couple ways I would go about this. So when it comes to frequencies, well, so the first thing I would do, right, is I would try to get everything as close to level in volume as possible. So as I let's say I take, maybe this part here, and I'll zoom in. My windows are all sorts of weird right now. I have no idea why. Anyway, and I'm going to turn this down just to make sure I'm not blowing out any eardrums. Yeah, so we use this. And the first thing I would do, if I'm going through this song, is I'd mute everything and then introduce the most important parts and then bounce everything to those levels. Now, there may be a point where it's all right, these two frequencies are so similar that I'm not hearing anything. So let's say I have this guitar distortion. I have this subwoofer, and you can see all these crazy things that I'm doing here. And eventually I have this kick drum in the later half of it, but we'll do these two things here. Actually, yeah, I got all these. I lie. And what else I have? Those are sound effects. Okay, yeah, maybe it is just these two things. All right, so I have this bass drum here and the sub. Perfect, because I can't actually really hear them. And I have this. And you don't really hear too much of this bass drum. Well, all right. So what would I do? If I were just doing EQ and I wanted these two things to stick out for whatever reason, I'd start looking at each of them individually. So let's look at the kick drum first, or the bass drum. I'm going to turn off. I guess I'd have to do this. All right. So this is what I have, right? I have something very, very high in this 50-ish range. The harmonics, so the other peaks here are pretty even. But really I'm getting most of the character in this low range. Now, if I look at the sub, it's drastically different, right? I'm seeing something really more in this maybe 70. We're over here, it's after 70, it's really coming up. So really, if I were doing this again, I want to see if I did this with my other EQ, which I probably didn't. Yeah. So if I wanted to separate these, I'm going to re-EQ this. And play them both together. Well, you can first of all hear that when I took the EQ off of the kick drum, you can hear it more because now we're starting to hear all this stuff higher up. If I EQ'd it again, you don't hear it anymore because they're covering the same spatial area. So what I would do if I wanted to EQ somehow is maybe if I know that this sub, that was weird that I actually put it this way. I'm going to take this. I'm actually going to move this sub, below 265. Looks like, honestly, I'd probably put it really below here, below 100, because I want it to be more of a feeling. It's like, all right, well, if that's now at that frequency, I'm going to move this, maybe above to where its second fundamental is really starting to come through. All right. Now I don't want all that like quackiness from it because I really still want to be bassy, but maybe I'm going to make this more of like a low mid sort of bass. And so I took those two instruments, right, that had so much overlap, and I said, I'm going to give this sub its own space within the frequency because it's stronger. It's more strong in the low end, and that's where I want it to shine. And this other one, the bass drum, I still want to be low, but maybe like not as low. I'm going to like put it in a next spot higher on the frequency. If I do an experiment and I move this down again, right, you can kind of hear it. And I actually do like the way that that sounds, but you're going to hear it more the more separated those frequencies are. Right? So that's how I would first go about doing that. Now, that begs the question then, too, with like this is a pretty simple example, but what happens when you have, 3 or 4 instruments that are sharing a space within the frequency range? There's a couple ways I think about it, right? Well, the first is what I just showed you, is if I can carve them apart, great. The second is we can only hear like 3 things going on at once. So if I like revert everything that I did and just, I don't know, get back to where I was, because I know I had this, I think I had these paired up in the same region for more of a color. Now you won't be able to hear these individually, but if I turn off the bass drum and I turn it back on, that now is more of a color. I'm thinking of it when that sub hits, because the sub only comes in and out, that bass drum is now giving it a color. And so I'm treating both of these instruments in this scenario as a singular instrument. I'm not trying to separate them. And so you see this a lot in orchestra, right? If I play, if you were to take your strings and your woodwinds and your brass, a lot of times in the orchestra, when they're, mixing instruments, they're going to put the flute with the violin, or the flute with the trumpet, or the trumpet with the violin. And then they're going to do like oboe with the viola, or, viola with the French horn, right? They start going down these layers if they're trying to tie them together in unison. And usually those parts are playing the same notes, right? So they're not writing, hey, I'm going to write this trumpet part and this violin part. It's no, I'm going to write this color, and I'm going to mix a little bit of trumpet. I'm going to mix a little bit of violin together to create a singular piece. So if I undo this song, and you listen to it, why isn't this playing? Oh. At any one point during that, you probably were only able to pick up 3 things unless I pulled something out and I put another thing in. So you probably heard the bass at the beginning. you probably heard the violin was the main thing that you heard. And that do, right? Those are the three things that boom, do, violin. Everything else is kind of color in between that. But each of those pieces, like each of those sounds that you heard, I put multiple things in there to give it its unique texture. Case in point, the bass, I have the kick drum and the sub playing together. The violin is just by itself, but that like guitar thing, I have like little delays from other echoes, kind of like a string screech on it to kind of like round out that frequency spectrum to give that piece of it its own space. So I'm looking, if I take this frequency spectrum, I'm like covering here, here, and here. And this might have two instruments contributing to it to give it a certain color. And this may have like three, and this may only have the one. So yeah, that would be the other way for frequency is combining pieces to create a unique color. And then finally, what I would say is if I'm EQing an instrument, I think about, like, sometimes it's worth thinking about, like sometimes people will be like, oh, you got to make it darker. You got to bring up the mids or the highs. And yes, to an extent. So I'm just going to make like another synth on here real quick because, and I promise I won't take as much time explaining this. And I call it Vital. Actually, no, we'll do Contact because it might be easier actually to show this with an actual instrument. And we'll do Century Strings, and we'll do, I don't know, Sul Ponticello. All right. And I'm just going to play that note, which is C, a really screechy Sul Pont C. All right. Now, if I open up EQ, and there's certain things that I want to, look at and hear, listen for. Well, there's a couple things. One, every instrument, everything that you play, you have their actual overtones. These are frequencies that are contributing to the character of that instrument. So the harmonics in each instrument is why if I play C on a guitar and C on a violin, they sound totally different. Or even on a piano, because like Zach, we were talking about envelopes. A guitar and a piano kind of have a similar envelope. It's a very quick attack, and then it kind of, the sustain doesn't really exist. It just kind of releases. So it's boom. But if I play on the guitar or play the piano, even though they have the same envelope, they sound very different because of the harmonics that are involved with each of those notes. So if I play this C, you can hear, or you can see on here, turn this down again. You can kind of see on this frequency spectrum, like when you hear more of that screechiness come up, like this area over here begins to pop up. Now, if I play that exact same, I'm going to Control C this, and we'll call it, screech and smooth with 3 syllables each. I don't know why I did that, but I did. And now I play something that is Sordino, which is more of like a sweeter sound. Why is it? Oh. The harmonics look completely different. If I play these both together and stick them side by side, I mean, so now what are we seeing? In C, we're seeing around here in each of these notes, this is our fundamental, the fundamental frequency. This is C that they're based off of, is around this 250 hertz for each of them. And on the smoother one, you're starting to see a more even pattern of those harmonics versus the rougher one is more jagged and filled in between. So that's also useful to know. So when I'm EQing an instrument and I want to bring out, or like maybe I have this screechy, more Ponticello, and I want to bring out that screechiness. Well, a lot of times people will be like, all right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, find the highs on here, and I'm going to, put a high shelf on here and go whoop and call it done. Which again, that can work. And I'm not saying you got to be surgical with your EQs. But if I go in here and I say like, all right, well, like what am I hearing between these two things? If I turn this smooth off and I'm just doing the screeching one, and I start like, you can hear like right there is so much that like nasty screechiness that you may want to cut out or you may want to improve. It's like, oh, but I like that. Cool. And let me just mute that. But there's also this like kind of whistling, which I feel, I want to say down here. Yeah. So if I want more of that, whistly screechiness, that's what my EQ would look like instead of slapping everything on here, because maybe I don't want more of that sweetness of the violin that's still in there to come out. Versus, right, that one sounds sweeter, but when I put the EQ on, you get a little bit more of that grit. If I were instead then, let's say I'll mute these, and we'll do one more version of this. If I mute these and just bring everything up and turn this into a high shelf, I'm pulling everything up, same level, it just sounds like the grit and the sweetness of the violin is louder. So that's another thing, is like when I think of frequencies, I'm like, all right, well, do I want the timbre to come out? Do I want the character to come out? And where in the frequency spectrum do I want this to come through? And you can start looking and listening for those harmonics and saying like, oh, kind of in between there is where I want it. I'm just going to pull that out or drop it down or whatever you want to do to alter the sound that way. So that would be the third way. So again, separating instruments to complement each other in the frequency spectrum, combining similar instruments to create a certain color, or altering individual characteristics within a certain instrument's timbre. That's how I would start selecting frequencies. Hope that helped. Cool. Well, I know we're about an hour in, so I don't want to keep y'all too much. But I hope that helped. I will make a gain versus volume video because I know I can explain it better. And I was just like, I'm not doing a very good job on this. But hopefully the EQ stuff helped. Hopefully the envelope stuff helped. And yeah, keep an eye out for that video, and I'll make it short and sweet. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Honestly, man, like what I found is, before I forget, because this does tie in. So 1 second, and then I'll touch on the point. All right. So what I found is, and I'm good to stay on if you guys have any more questions, but I just want to let you know that like I'm not going to keep you guys any longer. So book, Mixing Secrets for the Small Studio by Mike Senior. Really anything Mike Senior, get it. Like I read this book, this textbook front to back, took notes on it. I also did the same thing with this Recording Secrets. I'll put it this way. When I went in and, did an internship at a recording studio, I didn't want to look like an asshole. So like I read a bunch before I went in so that I could at least know. And they taught me cable management and how to mic up a drum kit. But when I actually came to sitting behind a mixing table, they had some like cool tips and tricks, but like I already kind of knew 90% of what they were teaching me. By the way, and that's not dissing them, right? They had just an amazing ear for this stuff, and they could just pull up some wild things I didn't have the experience yet. But when it came to the technical side of things, like I knew it already. And so like these books, especially the blue one, this one is going to teach you like, I mean, like everything. I can't even like how to balance, how to use reverbs and delays and EQs and dynamics and, you know, fluent balancing and tuning adjustments and all sorts of crazy stuff. This Green Room Recording Secrets is more about like how microphones and, you know, different things like that work and how you can do experiments with how you record your setup to get certain tones out of it. This one is less useful to me. It's still very useful though, simply for the fact that like when I go into Kontakt and I start playing with microphone settings, I'm like, oh, okay, I know that I want to get this effect, and here's what I have with my mics. If I do this, this is going to get me there. Likewise, if I use an amp simulator, I can be like, oh, I know if I use an SM57, not smack dab in the middle of the cab, but kind of off to the side a little bit, it's going to give me that nice crispy presence, but not make it, and like still give me some deep end without being static or muddier. Yes, I will. Let me do that real quick. Yes, mixing secrets for the small and recording secrets for the small studio, blue and green book, respectively. How to choose anyway, so yeah, Zach, so to get back to your question, like I read those cover to cover. I got a couple plugins, like Helm and things like that, and I read their manuals cover to cover. And I would say I did that for maybe like 2 or 3 things. And then after that, like when I see something, I'm like, I know what that does. Because like once you do one, they might use slightly different lingo. But after that, like it's pretty much all the same thing. And then it turns, at least for me, it was less like, oh, I'm gonna like randomly turn knobs and hope and pray like this is gonna work. To more like, okay, I know if I do this, it should have this effect, and like let me hear it back and forth and see what happens. So yeah. The good news is basically what I'm saying. The good news is you only got to read the shit once, and then after that, there's not much that's going to surprise you on the technical side. Yeah. Cool. You bet. Thank you guys for joining. And yeah, I'll be putting on some more things soon. And as always, if you guys have any ideas for a cool AMA, let me know. I'd be happy to set you guys up as I'm trying to fill the calendar with some cool events. Awesome. See you later, Zach. Have a good one. Drift, I'm happy to step. Cool. I guess everybody's gone. Sweet. All right. Done so. End.